Hey readers and writers, and yes, I am on the Bookish Friends collab channel today. I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you, Bookish Friends, for having me. This is such a wonderful experience for me, and I am so happy to be a part of your discussion this month, which is new authors. Now for my video, I want to discuss new authors, but I really want to focus on the risk you take when you experience a new author for the first time. Now this month I read two novels that were new authors to me. One is actually a debut novel of an author, and the other an author has had two books out. I had two very different experiences with them, and I want to share them with you guys. And then I want to discuss a little bit on whether it's worth the risk to read a new author. Now I know there is always a risk when you read a new book, but it's a little less of a risk, I believe, when you're reading a book by an author you've read before, because you already know what to expect as far as writing style. You know what to expect, how they develop their characters, how they develop their plot. You kind of know that, and you kind of know whether or not their content's going to be good or not. I'm not saying that it's always going to be as great as the first book you read, but I think you see my point. There's a little less of a risk there. But with new authors, you're putting your faith into this person, hoping that their book is going to be good. You have no idea of the writing style, you have no idea how they develop characters, plot, and all of that. So this month, like I said, I read two unknown authors. Now, the first book I want to share with you is Our Tragic Universe by Scarlett Thomas. Now, I'm going to just give you a little brief, just a brief thing. I got 118 pages into this book. Tossed it aside and said life is too short to be reading this. I'm guessing you can see what kind of experience I had with this book. This book I was not at all, it was just not enjoyable. I did not like it whatsoever. My biggest problem with this book is, and maybe this is just a little quirk of mine, but the biggest problem I had was that there were no chapters. There was never a good stopping point. And I know how with some books, you know, it doesn't matter whether there's a good stopping point or not because you gotta just keep reading. But with this book, because I was already not enjoying it, I couldn't have a good stopping point to be like, okay, I'm going to stop here for the night, I'm going to go to bed, I'm going to pick it up again in the morning. There was never a stopping point. There was no break between paragraphs. It was just one long story. My second quip was the plot, which I don't even like to say there was a plot. Basically, we have this girl, Meg, who gets this book, The Science of Living Forever, which is about, I guess, how you end up living forever after you die, which that all wasn't explained to me. Maybe I didn't get far enough in the novel, but that's just the basic idea of this book that she gets to review. And she goes from there, and this book is supposedly changes her life. Well, I was 118 pages in. The book is about 370 pages, I guess. Maybe I just didn't get far enough, but I felt like that main plot wasn't touched on long enough. I felt like it was just her going through her everyday life. Like, it felt like a very dull vlog. That's what it felt like to me. I mean, there were a couple of little things that were exciting, but they just seemed forced. So, like I said, overall, did not like this book. Now, the risk I took, obviously, was whether or not I was going to like it. And, unfortunately, that risk wasn't worth it. I ended up not liking the book, and now I'm very afraid to read anything else by this author. I believe she has The End of Mr. Y and Pot Co. out, which I hear The End of Mr. Y is pretty good. But because I invested so much time in this book, 118 pages, I mean, that could be half of another book that I really enjoy, which kills me. And what else kills me is that I didn't finish the book. Now, I know I could have very easily finished the book and said, you know what, I'll just suffer through it. But when you get to a book that you have to toss aside and say, life is too short to be reading this, finishing it is just not doing yourself a favor. But going back to the risk involved, I invested time in the characters, the plot, which really wasn't there, and the writing style, and I did not come out with a good experience. And now this puts me off on this author. I don't think I'll ever pick up anything by her again, which maybe that's not a good thing on my part because I could really enjoy something else she's written. But I don't want to risk investing the time in something else. So this is one of those experiences where you kind of risk putting time into things and it doesn't come out in a good way. So then this next book I want to share I had a very different experience with, and it's The Language of Flowers by Vanessa Diffenbog. That is the first time I've ever tried to pronounce that woman's name. No idea if I pronounced it right, but be proud of me. Anyway, just for you, Bookish Friends. Just for you. Anyway, The Language of Flowers I had a very different experience with. I enjoyed this book so much so that it ended up on my top picks list. And my top picks list is something that only a maximum of 10 books could ever be on, and they're my 10 all-time favorites. Right now there are only 8 books on there, but The Language of Flowers managed to get on there, so I'm sure that can tell you how much I loved it. Basically, just a little bit summary of this book. We have a girl named Victoria Jones who's been in the foster care system all of her life, or most of her life, and she's not a very happy person, to put it mildly, so she really doesn't know how to communicate with others, and the way she does communicate is through the language of flowers. She's very enthralled with flowers and the meanings behind them, and that's how she communicates with people. And eventually she learns to communicate more and more, and there's this whole beautiful story, and it's just, such a good book. But anyway, what I loved about this book, the writing style, everything was well-rounded, the characters, the plot. There was a lot to the plot. It was, like I said, a beautiful story. It was just overall really good. I don't think I could express how good this story was and how much I recommend it. But here is an example of when you take a risk with an unknown author, and this is the author that actually, she hasn't had it. This is her debut novel. So this is really putting a big risk into somebody new. You never know. You don't have any reviews out there as to whether or not they're good, or any other reference. You don't have reviews of this book because it's brand new, and you're putting that risk. You're really, really, really taking a risk there. And the risk that I took was well worth it, because it actually became one of my favorite books of all times. My question is, though, is it worth finding the good ones when you get stuck with the bad ones? Personally, I think it's well worth it, because like I said, The Language of Flowers ended up on my top picks list. Now, going to my top picks list, I realized, thinking about this, a lot of them were new authors for me, these books that I added on. I have Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson on there. And Speak is a very well-known book. Laurie Halse Anderson is very well-known, but when the book came out is when I read it. So she was unknown at the time. Speak was her first, I think Speak was her debut novel, but I'm not 100% sure. Either way, she was brand new to me, and that ended up on my list. Prozac Nation by Elizabeth Wurtzel, I had never heard of her, and I believe Prozac Nation was her first book. It's a memoir, and that ended up on my list. The Story of Beautiful Girl by Rachel Simon. I had never heard of Rachel Simon before. That ended up on my top picks list. And then there's another kind of example with Beautiful Creatures I have. That ended up on my top picks list. Now, while I had heard of Beautiful Creatures, I didn't know about the authors. I didn't know anything about Cami Garcia or Margaret Stoll, and that was the reason why I didn't pick up Beautiful Creatures sooner than what I did. I was hesitant. I really didn't know what the story was about, kind of didn't want to know anything about it because I had never heard anything from either of these authors, and that really put me off, and I didn't want to take the risk. When I finally took the risk, though, it ended up being a really good outcome. So I guess the point I'm just trying to make here, maybe I'm rambling, I apologize if I'm rambling. The point I'm just trying to make, is it well worth taking the risk? And personally, I think it is worth taking the risk. I think you can really close yourself off from a lot of great books because you're afraid that you won't enjoy them and that you've never heard of the author before, or that you've never experienced the author previously. I mean, we all have to experience authors for the first time. That's how we're going to start reading books, and how we're going to start determining whether we like their books and whether we're going to continue with them. But after so long, you do kind of get into your you kind of settle into what you know you like and what you don't like, and you kind of don't want to break out of that comfort zone. But I think it's worth breaking out of that comfort zone to find new authors. Anyway, I hope I wasn't rambling. I hope I made my point very clear. Is the risk worth taking? I think it is. Now, questions for you guys. Have you ever had a negative experience with a new author? What book was that, and what author was that? And what was your experience like? Like, did you end up finishing the book? Did you end up having to put it down because life is too short? What about a good experience? What good experiences have you had with new authors? And what are those books? What are those authors? Have you read anything else by those authors? Then, too, go back to the negative experiences. Had you read anything else by that author after you had the negative experience? See, I'm very hesitant to read anything else by Scarlett Thomas. Kind of on the side that I'm not going to, but I'm very curious to hear your experiences as to whether or not you read something else with an author you had a negative association with and it turned out to be good. Write a comment down below, or better yet, do a video response. Talk about this. What are your thoughts on taking risks with new authors? And what are your experiences? Anyway, this has been Kayla the Bookworm over on the Bookish Friends collab channel. Again, thank you guys for having me. I had so much fun doing this. and I will see you guys later.